In a quiet Denver apartment parking lot, a 28-year-old marketing coordinator was about to face the most devastating betrayal of her life. What started as a peaceful morning ritual took a shocking turn when her own brother demanded her prized 1967 Mustang convertible. Sarah Mitchell wasn't your typical pushover. For 3 years, she had sacrificed everything to buy her dream car. Known for her unwavering work ethic, when she refused Michael's wedding day demand, she had no idea she was walking into a calculated war that would threaten her career and expose decades of toxic family manipulation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Mitchell's fingertips traced the pristine cherry red paint of her 1967 Ford Mustang convertible, the early morning Denver sun casting golden reflections across its flawless surface. 3 years. 3 years of sacrifice had led to this moment, standing in her apartment complex parking lot at 6:47 a.m., still in her pajamas and robe, unable to resist the daily ritual of checking on her dream made manifest. The car sat there, like a promise kept to herself. Chrome bumpers gleaming, white leather interior pristine. The classic lines of American muscle car perfection. Her neighbors probably thought she was obsessive, the way she came out here every morning before work, running her hands along the fenders, checking for scratches that never appeared. But they didn't understand. They couldn't. This wasn't just a car. February 15th, 3 years ago. The dealership showroom floor, fluorescent lights humming overhead. The memory surfaced unbidden as her palm pressed against the warm metal of the hood. She'd been walking past Classic Auto Denver on her lunch break, another forgettable Tuesday in her endless cycle of work and responsibility, when she saw it through the window. Cherry red paint job, white racing stripes. The salesman had seen her staring and waved her inside. "She's a beauty, isn't she?" His voice had carried that practiced enthusiasm of someone who sold dreams for a living. 1967 Mustang convertible, numbers matching original engine, only 47,000 miles. Sarah had known immediately she couldn't afford it. The price tag might as well have been written in a foreign language, but she'd asked anyway. How much? $28,500, but for the right buyer. He'd paused, studying her face. Something in her expression must have given away her longing. "We do financing." She'd laughed then, a sound edged with the kind of tiredness that came from working 2 jobs and sending money home for her father's medical bills. "I appreciate it, but I can't. I just wanted to look." Walking away had felt like leaving a piece of herself behind. That night, lying in her studio apartment, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a map of somewhere she'd never been, Sarah had made a decision. She opened her laptop and created a spreadsheet. Every expense, every dollar, every corner she could cut. The math was brutal but possible. 3 years of saying no to everything that wasn't absolutely necessary. 3 years of ramen noodles and generic cereal, of skipping movies with friends and wearing the same 3 work outfits in rotation. "Sarah, come on," Jake Anderson had said 6 months into her savings plan. They were in the office break room, and he was trying to convince her to join the group for happy hour. "It's just drinks. You work harder than anyone here. You deserve to have some fun." "I can't." The words had come out sharper than she'd intended. Jake's face had fallen, and she'd immediately felt guilty. "I'm saving for something." "Saving? For what? You never do anything anymore. When's the last time you went out? When's the last time you bought yourself something nice?" She'd wanted to tell him about the car, about the dream that kept her going through double shifts and family, guilt, and the endless cycle of giving everything to everyone else. But Jake wouldn't understand. Nobody would. It would sound selfish, frivolous. A $28,000 car when she could buy something reliable for a fraction of the cost. So she'd just shrugged. Just saving. Now running her fingers. Along the Mustang's side mirror, Sarah remembered the look on Jake's face when she'd finally driven it to work for the first time. Pure shock, followed by something that might have been respect. He'd understood then. Not just the car, but what it represented. The discipline. The commitment to herself. Her phone buzzed in her robe pocket, interrupting the memory. A text from her mother. "Call me when you get a chance. Need to talk about Michael's wedding plans." Sarah's jaw tightened slightly. Michael's wedding. 2 weeks away, and already the requests were starting. The subtle hints about family support, about everyone pitching in to make his day special. She could read between the lines of her mother's messages. Michael needed something, and somehow it would become Sarah's responsibility to provide it. But not today. Today was about the drive. She went back upstairs, showered, and dressed in jeans and a sweater. 20 minutes later, she was sliding. Behind the wheel of the Mustang, the leather seat molding to her body like it had been made for her. The engine turned over with a rumble that seemed to vibrate through her bones. Not the rough growl of modified street racers, but the confident purr of American engineering at its finest. The morning traffic on I-70 westbound was light, and within 30 minutes Sarah was climbing into the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. She'd discovered this route by accident, a winding road that led up through pine forests and granite outcroppings, to a small parking area overlooking the Denver metro area. It had become her sanctuary, the place she came when work stress or family obligations threatened to overwhelm her. She pulled into the empty lot and killed the engine. The silence was immediate and profound. No traffic, no city noise, just whine through pine branches and the distant call of a hawk somewhere above the tree line. From here, Denver looked small and manageable, a grid of streets and buildings spread across the high plains like a child's toy set. This was what freedom felt like. Sarah had always been the responsible one. The younger sister who dropped out of college at 19 when her father had his accident, who worked 2 jobs to help with medical bills while Michael finished law school, and Emma pursued her engineering degree. She'd told herself it was temporary, that she'd go back to school once things stabilized. But things never stabilized. There was always another crisis, another family member who needed support, another reason why Sarah's dreams had to wait. Except for this. The car represented something nobody could take from her, something she'd earned through her own sacrifice and determination. When she was behind the wheel, climbing mountain roads with nothing but blue sky ahead, she wasn't the family caretaker or the dutiful daughter, or the employee who always said yes to overtime. She was just Sarah, 28 years old and finally putting herself first. Her phone rang, the sound jarring in the mountain stillness. Mom. Sarah stared at the display for 3 rings before answering. Hi, Mom. Sarah, honey, I'm so glad I caught you. Are you at work? Not yet. What's up? Patricia Mitchell's voice carried that particular tone Sarah had learned to recognize. Carefully casual, but with an underlying current of maternal manipulation. Well, I wanted to talk to you about Michael's wedding. There are just a few little things. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the peaceful moment slip away like water through her fingers. What kind of things? Oh, nothing major. It's just that some of the planning has been more expensive than they anticipated, and you know how hard Ashley's been working to make everything perfect. Michael was wondering if maybe family could help out with a few details. The familiar weight settled on Sarah's shoulders. Michael wondering, Ashley working hard, family helping out, the coded language of her childhood, where Sarah's needs always came last, and Michael's wants somehow became family emergencies. What does he need, Mom? Well, that's the thing. Their transportation fell through. The classic car rental they'd booked. The company went out of business, can you believe it? And with the wedding so close, they can't find anything nearly as nice in their budget. Sarah's grip tightened on the steering wheel. She could see where this was heading, could feel the familiar trap closing around her. That's too bad. I know you'd want to help if you could, honey. And Michael remembered that beautiful car of yours. The words hung in the mountain air between them. Sarah stared out at the vista spread below, at the freedom she'd bought with 3 years of her life, and felt something cold settle in her chest. Mom, she said quietly, I need to get to work. Of course, dear. But maybe we could talk about this later. I know you care about your brother's happiness. After ending the call, Sarah sat in the Mustang's driver's seat, watching clouds cast shadows across the valleys below. The peace of the morning felt fragile now, like glass about to shatter. She'd known this moment would come eventually. Her family had a way of finding her weak spots, of making their wants feel like her obligations. But this time was different. This time, she had something that was entirely hers. Something worth fighting for. The drive back to Denver felt shorter than usual, as if the mountain road was trying to hold her back from the world of compromises and family obligations waiting below. As the city skyline grew larger in her windshield, Sarah made herself a promise. Whatever Michael wanted, whatever guilt her mother tried to lay on her, she would not give up the one thing that truly belonged to her. The Mustang purred through Denver traffic, carrying her toward another day at the office, another day of being responsible Sarah who always said yes. But for the first time in years, she was ready to say no. The knock on Sarah's apartment door came at 7:30 p.m., 3 sharp raps that somehow managed to sound both casual and demanding. She paused the Netflix show she'd been half watching and peered through the peephole. Michael stood in the hallway, hands in his pockets, that familiar smile already in place, the one that had charmed teachers, professors, and judges throughout his golden child career. Sarah opened the door, immediately struck by how much her older brother looked like their father had at 32. Same thick dark hair, same confident stance, same way of taking up space as if the world owed him room to breathe. "Hey, little sister." Michael stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his eyes already scanning her modest studio apartment. "Nice place. Very minimalist." The comment stung, as it was meant to. Michael's condo in Cherry Creek probably cost more per month than Sarah made in 2, but he delivered the observation with practiced casualness, as if he wasn't calculating the difference between their lives. "What brings you by, Michael?" Sarah closed the door, already feeling the familiar tension that came with her brother's presence. "Don't you have wedding stuff to handle?" "That's actually why I'm here." He moved to her small window, looking out at the parking lot where the Mustang sat under a streetlight. "Jesus, Sarah, that's really something out there." She followed his gaze to her car, feeling a protective flutter in her chest. "Thanks. Dad would have loved that car. Remember how he used to talk about the Mustang he had in high school, before Mom made him sell it for the down payment on the house?" The mention of their father hit exactly as Michael intended. Sarah felt the familiar weight of family history, the stories of sacrifice and responsibility that had shaped their childhood. But she also heard the calculation in his voice, the way he was already building toward something. "I remember." She kept her voice neutral. Michael turned from the window, flashing that smile again. "You know, it's funny. Ashley and I were just talking about you yesterday, about how proud we are of what you've accomplished. I mean, look at you. Your own place, that incredible car, doing well at work. After everything you went through with Dad's medical bills, dropping out of school to help the family. Michael." Sarah's voice carried a warning. "What do you want?" He laughed, but it sounded forced. "Can't a brother visit his sister? Can't I appreciate how far you've come?" "You can. But you're building up to something, and I'd rather you just say it." For a moment, his mask slipped, and she saw the stress he'd been hiding. The wedding planning had taken its toll. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there at Christmas, and his lawyer's composure seemed thinner than usual. "Okay, fine. Direct it is." He sat down on her couch without being invited, suddenly looking older. "We have a problem with the wedding. We? Ashley and I. Our transportation fell through. Classic Cars of Colorado, the rental company we booked 8 months ago, they went bankrupt last week. Just gone. Took deposits from dozens of couples and disappeared." Sarah felt a cold certainty settling in her stomach. "I'm sorry to hear that. It's been a nightmare. Do you know how hard it is to find a decent classic car rental 2 weeks before a wedding? Everything else is either booked or costs more than we paid for the flowers." Michael's voice took on the tone he'd used as a child when he wanted something. Reasonable, slightly wounded, as if the world was being unfair to him personally. "That sounds really stressful." "It is. And that's when I thought of you. I mean, that Mustang out there. It's perfect. Classic American muscle. Cherry red. Convertible. It's exactly what Ashley and I had envisioned for our wedding day." There it was. Sarah felt something cold and sharp unfold in her chest. Michael, no. Hear me out. He leaned forward, switching to his courtroom voice, persuasive, logical, seemingly reasonable. It would just be for the day. A few hours, really. The ceremony, some photos, maybe the drive to the reception. Ashley's been crying about this, Sarah. She had her heart set on arriving in a classic car, and now, the car isn't insured for other drivers. Sarah's voice sounded steady, but her hands were shaking slightly. If something happened, nothing's going to happen. I'm a good driver, you know that. And it's just for the wedding. One day, Sarah, one day to help make your brother's wedding perfect. It's not just about insurance. She stood up, needing to create distance between them. That car. It means something to me, Michael. It took me 3 years to save for it. 3 years of what? Eating ramen noodles? I know you made sacrifices, but that's what family does. We sacrifice for each other. His voice hardened, slightly. Like when you dropped out of school to help with Dad's bills. That was the right thing to do, the family thing to do. The guilt hit like a physical blow. This was Michael's specialty, finding the exact pressure point that would make her cave. He'd been doing it since they were children, using her sense of responsibility against her. This is different. How is it different? You helped the family then, and I'm asking you to help the family now. It's one day, Sarah. One day to help your brother start his marriage right. Because it's mine. The words came out louder than she'd intended. Because for once in my life, I have something that's just mine. Something I worked for. Something I earned. Something that nobody else gets to claim or borrow or use because it's family. Michael's expression shifted, the charm falling away entirely. Are you serious right now? You're going to let your brother's wedding be ruined because you can't share a car for one day? I'm not ruining anything. Your rental company going bankrupt isn't my fault, and your poor planning isn't my emergency. Poor planning? Michael stood up, his voice rising. We booked that company 8 months ago. We did everything right. And now my sister, my own sister, won't help when I need her. Find another solution. There is no other solution. The golden child facade, cracked completely. Do you know what this wedding is costing? Do you know the pressure I'm under? Ashley's parents are already questioning whether I can provide for their daughter, and now I can't even handle the basic logistics of my own wedding? Sarah saw him, then as he really was. Not the successful lawyer, not the family golden child, but a man who'd built his entire identity on other people's resources and expectations. Someone who'd never learned the word no, because the family had always made sure he never had to hear it. That's not my problem to solve, Michael. Fine. His voice went cold, controlled. The mask was back, but this time it was the face he wore in courtrooms when he was about to destroy an opponent. I hope you're prepared for the consequences of that decision. What's that supposed to mean? Michael was already walking toward the door. It means family goes both ways, Sarah. If you're not willing to be part of this family when we need you, maybe we need to reconsider what being family means. He paused at the door, his hand on the knob. Mom's going to be very disappointed. She was so proud when I told her I was going to ask you. She said, Sarah will help. Sarah always helps family. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Sarah alone in her studio apartment. Outside her window, the Mustang sat under the streetlight, beautiful and untouchable, and entirely hers. But Michael's parting words echoed in the sudden silence, carrying the weight of a lifetime of family obligations and the cold promise of consequences yet to come. Sarah stared at her computer screen, the marketing campaign presentation blurring before her eyes. The PowerPoint slides about quarterly projections and consumer demographics felt impossibly trivial after last night's confrontation with Michael. She'd barely slept, replaying the conversation over and over, second-guessing her decision to stand firm. The coffee in her mug had gone cold an hour ago, but she kept lifting it to her lips anyway, going through the motions of normalcy while her mind churned. Around her, the office hummed with typical Tuesday morning energy. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the low murmur of colleagues discussing weekend plans and project deadlines. Jake Anderson appeared at her cubicle with his own coffee, studying, her face with the concerned expression of someone who'd learned to read distress signals from his years in foster care. "You look like hell," he said, settling into the chair beside her desk. "Family drama?" "Something like that." Sarah minimized the presentation she hadn't been working on anyway. "Michael came by last night." "Ah." Jake's expression darkened. He'd met Michael exactly once, at the office Christmas party, and had immediately pegged him as what he called a taker, someone who viewed relationships as transactions. What did the golden boy want this time? Before Sarah could answer, her desk phone rang. The caller ID showed an internal extension. Robert Williams, regional manager. Her stomach dropped. Robert never called unless something was wrong, and, given his recent promotion, he was constantly under pressure to prove himself to the corporate office. Sarah Mitchell speaking. "Sarah, could you come to my office, please? We need to discuss something." The formal tone sent ice through her veins. In the 2 years she'd worked under Robert, he'd never sounded so official, professional in the way that meant trouble. "Of course, I'll be right there." Jake was watching her face. What was that about? I don't know. But she had a terrible suspicion, a cold certainty settling in her chest like a stone. "Cover for me." Robert Williams's office sat at the corner of their floor, glass walls offering a view of downtown Denver's skyline that usually made Sarah feel optimistic about her career prospects. Today, the mountains in the distance looked like barriers, hemming her in. Robert was younger than most regional managers, maybe 38, with the kind of focused intensity that came from working 60-hour weeks to prove he deserved his promotion. He'd always been fair with Sarah, even supportive, which made the careful distance in his expression all the more unsettling. "Please, sit down." He gestured to the chair across from his desk, then closed the door, something he'd never done in their previous meetings. "Sarah, I received a phone call yesterday afternoon that I need to discuss with you." The stone in her chest grew heavier. "A phone call? From someone claiming to be concerned about your reliability?" Robert's discomfort was obvious. He kept adjusting papers on his desk, avoiding direct eye contact. "The caller suggested there might be issues with your work performance, possibly even misuse of company resources." Sarah felt the world tilt slightly. "I'm sorry, what?" "The caller claimed to have knowledge of behaviors that could be problematic for the company. Suggested we might want to look more closely at your expense reports, your use of company time, that sort of thing." Who was the caller? But she already knew. The certainty was like ice water in her veins. Someone claiming to be a family friend said they felt obligated to reach out because they were concerned about potential issues that could reflect badly on the company. Robert finally looked at her directly. "Sarah, I've reviewed your work extensively since that call. Your performance has been exemplary. Your expense reports are spotless. But I have to ask, is there anything going on that I should know about? Any personal issues that might be affecting your work?" The careful wording told her everything. Robert was trying to be fair, trying to give her a chance to explain, but the damage was already done. Doubt had been planted. Her reliability, the foundation of her professional reputation, was now in question. "Robert, She stopped, realizing how impossible this was to explain. How could she tell him that her own brother had called her workplace with fabricated accusations because she wouldn't lend him her car? How could she explain the toxic family dynamics without sounding like she was making excuses? "There's a family situation," she said carefully. "Someone who's upset with me over a personal matter. But it has nothing to do with my work performance." "I see." Robert's expression remained neutral, but she could see him processing this information, fitting it into some mental framework of workplace problems he'd been trained to handle. Is this something that could escalate? Something that might affect your ability to do your job? The question hung in the air between them. Sarah realized with horrible clarity that Michael's manipulation had worked exactly as intended. He'd found a way to make her personal decision into a professional crisis. Her refusal to lend him the car had been transformed into doubt about her character, her reliability, her fitness as an employee. "I don't believe so," she said, hating how uncertain she sounded. "Sarah, I want to be clear. Your work speaks for itself. I have no concerns about your performance or your integrity. But if there are external factors that might create problems for the company, I need to know about them." She sat there in the glass office, looking out at the Denver skyline, feeling Michael's strategic mind at work even in his absence. He'd found her pressure point with surgical precision. Her job wasn't just her livelihood, it was her independence, her escape from the family dynamics that had defined her for so long. "I understand," she said finally. "Thank you for talking to me directly instead of just accepting anonymous accusations." "Of course." Robert's relief was visible. "That said, I do need to document this conversation. Standard procedure when we receive calls like this." Sarah nodded, understanding the implications. There would be a record now, a file with her name on it, a permanent question mark attached to her professional reputation. Even if nothing came of it, even if her work continued to be exemplary, the doubt would always be there. She walked back to her cubicle in a daze, feeling like she was moving through water. Jake took one look at her face and stood up. "What happened?" "Michael called my boss." The words came out flat, emotionless. "Made up some story about me, being unreliable, possibly stealing from the company." Jake's expression went cold. "Jesus Christ. Over a car? Over control." Sarah sank into her chair, finally understanding the true scope of Michael's manipulation. "He's not trying to get my car anymore. He's trying to destroy my life until I give him what he wants." The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't about transportation for his wedding. This was about power, about making sure Sarah knew her place in the family hierarchy, about ensuring that her moment of independence, her single act of self-preservation, came with consequences so severe she'd never dare say no again. Outside her cubicle, the office continued its normal rhythm, colleagues unaware that her world had just shifted on its axis. Sarah stared at her computer screen, the marketing presentation still minimized, and wondered if keeping her car was worth losing everything else. But even as the thought crossed her mind, she felt something harder crystallizing in her chest. Anger, maybe, or resolve. Michael had made this war. Now she had to figure out how to fight it. Sarah left work at 3:17 p.m., claiming a sudden migraine that wasn't entirely a lie. The fluorescent lights had been stabbing at her eyes for the past hour, and every conversation around her felt muffled, as if she were underwater. She drove aimlessly through Denver's suburban sprawl, taking random turns whenever traffic lights turned yellow, needing movement without destination. The Mustang's engine purred beneath her, the one constant in a day that had tilted her world sideways. She found herself in a strip mall parking lot in Lakewood, staring at a coffee shop called The Daily Grind through her windshield. The irony wasn't lost on her. Even her subconscious was making jokes about her situation. Inside, the coffee shop smelled like roasted beans and possibility. Sarah ordered a large dark roast and found a corner table, her hands shaking slightly. As she pulled out her phone, Jake answered on the first ring. "How bad is it?" His voice carried the immediate concern of someone who'd learned to read crisis situations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Bad. Sarah's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Jake, he called my job, my actual job. Made up lies about me stealing from the company." "Son of a bitch!" The venom in Jake's voice surprised her. "Sarah, listen to me. This isn't about the car anymore. This is about control. This is about making sure you know what happens when you don't fall in line." "I know." She stared into her coffee, watching steam rise from the dark surface. I keep thinking maybe I should have just said yes. Maybe it would have been easier." "Easier for who? For Michael? For your mom? What about easier for you?" The question hung between them, and Sarah realized she couldn't remember the last time someone had asked what would be easier for her. The family dynamic had trained her so well that her first instinct was always to minimize her own needs, to find the path that caused the least disruption for everyone else. Jake, what if I'm being selfish? What if… Stop. His voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. Sarah, I'm coming over there. Where are you? The daily grind on Wadsworth. Stay put, I'm 20 minutes out. While she waited, Sarah tried to organize her thoughts, to find some rational perspective on the situation. But every angle she examined led back to the same conclusion. Michael had weaponized her workplace against her. He'd crossed a line that transformed a family disagreement into something much more dangerous. Jake arrived in 18 minutes, his usually calm demeanor replaced by the focused intensity she'd seen when he talked about his childhood in foster care. He slid into the chair across from her, his gray eyes scanning her face like he was assessing damage. Tell me exactly what your boss said. Sarah recounted the conversation with Robert, watching Jake's expression grow darker with each detail. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his sandy hair. Okay, here's what we're going to do. First, you're going to document everything. Every conversation with Michael, every family pressure session, everything. Dates, times, witnesses if there were any. Jake, I don't want to… This isn't about what you want anymore, Sarah. Your brother made this a war when he called your boss. You can either fight it or let him destroy you piece by piece. His voice softened slightly. I've seen this before, in different forms. Toxic family members who can't handle anyone else having boundaries. They escalate until you either cave completely or cut them out entirely. Sarah's phone buzzed against the table. Unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something made her answer. Hello? Sarah? This is Ashley. Ashley Thompson, Michael's fiancée. The voice was strained, like someone who'd been crying. I was wondering, could we talk? Privately? Sarah met Jake's eyes across the table. He raised an eyebrow, clearly having heard enough to understand who was calling. Yes. When? Now, if possible. I know this is weird, but I really need to speak with you. There are things you should know about Michael, about what's been happening with the wedding planning. Where? There's a restaurant called Cafe Luna on South Broadway. Do you know it? Sarah knew it. A quiet place with good food and private. Booths, the kind of restaurant where people went to have difficult conversations. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Thank you. Ashley's relief was audible. Sarah, I had no idea about the call to your boss. When I found out, The line went quiet for a moment, filled with the weight of unspoken words. I'll see you soon, Ashley said finally, and hung up. Jake was watching Sarah intently. Michael's fiancé wants to meet? Apparently. Sarah pocketed her phone, feeling something shift in her chest. She says she didn't know about the call to my boss. Interesting. Jake's expression was thoughtful. You know what this means? That Michael's been lying. To her too? That you might not be fighting this alone. Jake reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Sarah, listen to me. I grew up in a system where manipulation was currency. I learned to spot the tactics, the patterns, what Michael's doing, the charm, the guilt, the escalation to public consequences. It's textbook emotional abuse. The words hit her like cold water. Emotional abuse. She'd never put that label on Michael's behavior, had always explained it, away as family dynamics, birth order issues, personality conflicts. But he's my brother. Being related doesn't give someone the right to destroy your life when you don't give them what they want. Jake's voice was gentle, but firm. Blood doesn't excuse behavior, Sarah. It never has. As she drove toward Cafe Luna, Jake's words echoed in her mind. The afternoon traffic was light, giving her time to think, to really examine the pattern of her relationship with Michael. The way he'd always expected her sacrifices. The way he'd never questioned whether his wants might conflict with her needs. The way he'd called her boss the day after she said no. For the first time since this began, Sarah felt something besides guilt and confusion. She felt angry. Clean. bright anger that cut through the fog of family obligation and revealed the situation for what it really was. Michael wasn't asking for help. He was demanding submission, and when she'd refused to submit, he'd tried to destroy her livelihood. That wasn't family love. That was something else entirely. Sarah pulled into the restaurant parking lot, her hands steady on the steering wheel for the first time all day. Whatever Ashley had to tell her, whatever revelations were waiting inside Cafe Luna, she was ready to hear them. The war Michael had started was about to get very interesting. Cafe Luna occupied a converted Victorian house on South Broadway, its intimate dining rooms created from what had once been parlors and bedrooms. Sarah found Ashley in a corner booth of the back room, hands wrapped around an untouched cup of tea, her usually perfect blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Even in jeans and a sweater, she looked like the kind of woman who belonged in bridal magazines, until you saw her eyes. Ashley had been crying. "Thank you for coming." Ashley's voice was hoarse, strained. "I wasn't sure you would, after everything." Sarah slid into the booth across from her, studying Michael's fiancé with new attention. She'd only met Ashley a handful of times at family gatherings, had always seen her as part of Michael's perfect life package, beautiful, accomplished, appropriately adoring. Now she looked fragile, uncertain. "You said there were things I should know." Ashley nodded, then seemed to struggle with where to begin. "I found out about the call to your boss this morning. Michael was on the phone with someone, I think your mother, and he was bragging about it. About how he'd applied some pressure to make you see reason." The casual cruelty of it hit Sarah like a slap. Michael bragging to their mother about threatening her job, as if it were just another strategic move in a game only he was playing. "I had no idea he'd done that," Ashley continued. "When I confronted him about it, he said it was just business, that sometimes you have to escalate situations to get people to be reasonable." She looked up, meeting Sarah's eyes. "Is that reasonable to you? Calling someone's boss with lies because they won't lend you their car?" "No, it's not. I didn't think so either." Ashley's laugh was bitter. "But according to Michael, I don't understand how family dynamics work. According to Michael, you've always been difficult about contributing to family needs." Sarah felt that familiar stab of doubt. The family narrative had always painted her as selfish, as someone who needed to be pushed to do the right thing. But hearing it repeated by Ashley, seeing it through an outsider's eyes, made it sound different, uglier. "Ashley, why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm starting to see patterns." Ashley's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "This isn't the first time Michael has escalated when he didn't get what he wanted." The waitress appeared, and Sarah ordered coffee she didn't want, needing the time to process what Ashley was saying. When they were alone again, Ashley continued. "The wedding planning has been a nightmare. Not because of normal stress, but because Michael has this vision of how everything should be. And when reality doesn't match, he finds ways to make it someone else's fault." Ashley's hands trembled slightly around her teacup. "The florist, the caterer, the venue coordinator. He's had screaming matches with all of them when they couldn't accommodate his last-minute changes." "That sounds stressful." "It's more than stressful. I teach middle school, Sarah. I know what bullying looks like. And that's what Michael does when he doesn't get his way. He finds people's pressure points and applies leverage until they cave." Sarah thought about Michael's visit to her apartment, the careful escalation from charm to guilt to threats, the immediate jump to attacking her professionally when personal pressure didn't work. "The transportation thing," Sarah said. "Was that really the rental company going bankrupt?" Ashley's silence was answer enough. "Jesus Christ." "Classic Cars of Colorado is fine," Ashley said quietly. "Michael canceled our reservation 3 weeks ago because he found something he liked better. More expensive, flashier. When I pointed out we couldn't afford it, he said, not to worry, he had an idea." The manipulation was breathtaking in its calculation. Michael had created his own crisis, then positioned Sarah as the selfish sister who wouldn't help solve it. He'd probably counted on her guilt, on her ingrained pattern of sacrifice to make her cave immediately. "Why are you marrying him?" The question slipped out before Sarah could stop it. Ashley's face crumpled. I keep asking myself the same thing. 6 months ago, I thought I knew who he was. Charming, successful, devoted to family. But the closer we get to the wedding, the more I see this other side. The side that has to win every argument, that can't handle being told no. Ashley, I called off our engagement once, about 2 months ago, just for a weekend. I was so overwhelmed by his need to control every detail, by the way he talked about people who disagreed with him. Ashley wiped her eyes with a napkin. He showed up at my apartment with flowers and apologies. Promised things would change. Said the wedding stress was making him act out of character. But it didn't change. It got worse, more subtle, but worse. Like he'd learned to hide it better, instead of actually changing. Ashley met Sarah's eyes. When I heard about what he did to you, about the call to your boss, I realized something. This isn't wedding stress. This is who he is. Sarah felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. Vindication that she wasn't crazy, that Michael's behavior really was as toxic as it felt. Sadness for Ashley, trapped in a situation she was only beginning to understand. What are you going to do? I don't know. Ashley's voice was small. The wedding is in 10 days. My parents flew in from Oregon. The deposits are all paid. Everyone's expecting. Everyone's expecting you to marry someone who bullies people when he doesn't get his way? Ashley flinched. When you put it like that. Ashley, I barely know you, but from what I can see you're a good person, a fair person. Is this really how you want to spend the rest of your life? Walking on eggshells, making excuses for his behavior, watching him destroy people who cross him? The question hung between them in the restaurant's dim lighting. Around them, other diners carried on normal conversations about normal problems, oblivious to the life-changing decision being wrestled with at their corner table. He called your boss, Ashley said finally, over a car. What happens when we're married and I disagree with him about something important? What happens when we have kids and they don't live up to his expectations? Sarah didn't answer. The questions were ones Ashley had to answer for herself. I'm scared, Ashley whispered. I'm scared of him, scared of the wedding, scared of canceling the wedding. I feel trapped. You're not trapped, Sarah said gently. Trapped is staying married to someone who scares you for the next 40 years. Everything else is just money and logistics. Ashley nodded slowly, as if testing the weight of that truth. Sarah, I'm sorry for what he did to you, for being part of the pressure to give in. I didn't understand what was really happening. You understand now. That's what matters. As they left the restaurant, Ashley paused in the parking lot. Whatever I decide about the wedding, I want you to know. Don't give him the car. Don't give him anything. People like Michael, they see generosity as weakness, boundaries as challenges to overcome. Sarah watched Ashley drive away, feeling like she'd just witnessed someone waking up from a long, complicated dream. The conversation had clarified something important. This wasn't about family loyalty or wedding stress or even a car. This was about power and who got to wield it in her life. For too long, Sarah had let Michael hold that power. But power, she was beginning to understand, was only effective when people agreed to give it up. Sarah's phone rang at 7:30 a.m. while she was still in bed, still trying to convince herself that yesterday's conversation with Ashley had been real and not some stress-induced hallucination. Her mother's name appeared on the screen, and Sarah knew with absolute certainty that this call would change everything. Hi, Mom. Sarah, honey, we need to talk. All of us. As a family. Patricia Mitchell's voice carried that particular tone of maternal authority that had shaped Sarah's childhood. Calm on the surface, but with steel underneath. I'm calling an emergency family meeting. Today. At my house. 2 o'clock. Mom, I don't think... Emma's flying in from Seattle. She'll be here by noon. Sarah sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. Emma never came home except for Christmas and major holidays. The fact that their middle sister was dropping everything to fly to Denver meant this situation had escalated beyond anything Sarah had anticipated. Why is Emma coming? Because this family is falling apart, and we're going to fix it before your brother's wedding is ruined. Patricia's voice cracked slightly. Sarah, I don't understand what's gotten into You. Michael is beside himself. Ashley's been crying for days. The whole wedding is in jeopardy because you won't help your own brother. The familiar guilt pressed down on Sarah's chest like a physical weight. This was the family dynamic in miniature. Sarah's refusal to sacrifice herself somehow became the cause of everyone else's problems. Michael's manipulation, his lies to her boss, his created crisis with the car rental, none of that mattered compared to Sarah's failure to fall in line. "I'll be there," Sarah said, because she didn't know what else to say. Patricia Mitchell's house in Wheat Ridge looked exactly the same as it had throughout Sarah's childhood. Small, but meticulously maintained, with a garden her mother tended like a shrine to domestic perfection. The living room where so many family discussions had taken place felt smaller now, cramped with the weight of decades of compromise and careful peacekeeping. Emma was already there when Sarah arrived, looking polished and successful in her crisp blazer and designer jeans. At 33, she'd inherited their father's analytical mind and their mother's organizational skills, channeling both into an engineering career that had taken her far from Denver's family drama. She gave Sarah a careful hug, her expression unreadable. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Emma said quietly. "I wasn't sure either." Patricia bustled around the kitchen, preparing coffee and arranging cookies on a plate as if proper presentation could somehow solve the crisis threatening her family's unity. She'd always believed that most problems could be resolved through the right combination of maternal authority and home-baked goods. "Sit, both of you. We need to discuss this situation before Michael gets here." They arranged themselves on the familiar furniture. Sarah on the couch where she'd done homework as a child, Emma in the reading chair by the window, Patricia perched on the edge of the recliner that had been their father's before his accident left him needing something more practical. "Sarah, I need you to help me understand why you're doing this to your brother." The phrasing was classic Patricia Mitchell. No acknowledgement of Michael's behavior. No recognition that there might be two sides to the conflict, just the assumption that Sarah was the problem, the family member who needed to be managed back into compliance. "Mom, has Michael told you about the car rental situation? The real story?" Patricia's expression flickered with uncertainty. "What? Do you mean the real story?" "The rental company didn't go bankrupt. Michael canceled their reservation weeks ago to try to get something more expensive. He created this whole crisis." "That's not—" Patricia started, then stopped. "Even if that's true, it doesn't change the fact that your brother needs help. And when he didn't get the help he wanted, he called my boss with lies about me stealing from the company." The words landed in the living room like stones thrown into still water. Patricia's face went white, and Emma's careful neutrality cracked. "He did what?" Emma's voice was sharp, professional. "Called my workplace, made up stories about me being unreliable, possibly misusing company resources. My boss had to investigate. There's now a file with my name on it questioning my character." Patricia shook her head slowly, as if the information couldn't quite penetrate her worldview. Michael wouldn't. "There must be some misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding, Mom." Sarah felt something hard and clear crystallizing in her chest. "Michael called my job to punish me for saying no. That's who your golden child really is. Don't call him that." Patricia's voice was sharp now, maternal protectiveness overriding everything else. "Michael has always been under tremendous pressure to succeed, to make this family proud. If he made a mistake—" "A mistake?" Emma's voice cut through their mother's excuses. "Mom, calling someone's employer with false accusations isn't a mistake. It's sabotage." Patricia turned to Emma with visible relief, as if her analytical daughter could somehow make this make sense. "Emma, you understand family loyalty. You understand that sometimes we have to make sacrifices for each other." "I understand manipulation when I see it." Emma's tone was coldly professional, the voice she probably used in boardrooms when presenting unpleasant data. "And I understand why I moved 2,000 miles away from this family's definition of loyalty." The front door opened with Michael's characteristic confidence. He walked into the living room like he owned it, his lawyer's smile in place, clearly expecting to find Sarah properly chastened and ready to capitulate. Instead, he found his two sisters united in a way that made his smile falter. "Well, this is cozy, he said, settling into the remaining chair with practiced casualness. I hope we're all ready to resolve this situation like adults. Emma spoke first, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years in corporate environments where manipulation had consequences. Michael, did you call Sarah's employer with false accusations about her work performance? The direct question clearly caught him off guard. Sarah watched his face cycle through expressions: surprise, calculation, then the return of his courtroom, composure. I made a phone call expressing concerns about Sarah's judgment, yes. Given her recent behavior, I felt her employer should be aware. You lied. Emma's interruption was surgical. You called her boss with fabricated accusations because she wouldn't lend you her car. Is that correct? It's more complicated than that. No, it isn't. Emma's voice was ice cold. You tried to destroy your sister's livelihood because she set a boundary you didn't like. There's nothing complicated about that. Patricia looked between her children, the carefully constructed family meeting slipping away from her control. This isn't how we solve problems in this family. We discuss, we compromise, we find solutions that work for everyone. Mom, Sarah said quietly, this family's idea of compromise has always been that I give up what I want, so everyone else can be happy. That's not compromise. That's sacrifice. And I'm done being the family sacrifice. Michael's careful composure finally cracked. You're being incredibly selfish, Sarah. This is my wedding we're talking about, the most important day of my life, and you're willing to ruin it over a car. I'm not ruining anything. You created this problem, and now you want me to solve it by giving up something that matters to me. When I said no, you tried to destroy my career. Sarah stood up, feeling stronger than she had in days. That's not family, Michael. That's extortion. The word hung in the air between them, ugly and true. Patricia made a sound like she'd been physically struck, but Emma nodded slowly, recognizing the accuracy of the description. Extortion, Emma repeated. That's exactly what it is. Michael's mask slipped completely, revealing the entitled rage that Ashley had described. You have no idea what you're talking about. Either of you. I've been the one holding this family together while Sarah plays with her toys and Emma runs away to Seattle. Holding it together? Emma's laugh was harsh. Michael, you've been using this family as your personal resource pool for 32 years. The difference is, Sarah finally learned to say no. The family meeting Patricia had called to restore order dissolved into the truth none of them had been willing to speak aloud. Michael stormed out, promising consequences that sounded more like threats than family concern. Patricia cried, mourning the loss of her carefully maintained family peace. But Emma stayed, and for the first time in years, Sarah didn't feel alone in her own living room. The knock on Robert Williams' office door came at 9:15 a.m. Wednesday morning, precisely when Sarah had been summoned. She'd spent the previous evening alternating between panic and determination, rehearsing explanations that somehow never sounded convincing even to herself. How do you tell your boss that your own brother tried to sabotage your career without sounding like someone who brings personal drama to work? Come in, Sarah. Please, close the door. Robert's office felt different today. Smaller, more formal. The casual rapport they'd built over 2 years of working together had been replaced by something careful and professional. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, the same one where she'd sat 3 days ago when this nightmare began. I wanted to follow up on our previous conversation. Robert opened a manila folder on his desk. Sarah caught a glimpse of her name typed across the tab and felt her stomach drop. I've completed my investigation into the allegations made against you. Investigation? The word came out smaller than she'd intended. Standard procedure when we receive calls questioning an employee's integrity. I've reviewed your work, performance, your expense reports, interviewed colleagues about your reliability and character. Robert's expression remained neutral, but Sarah caught something in his tone. Maybe respect, maybe sympathy. I found no evidence supporting any of the accusations. Relief flooded through her so suddenly she felt dizzy. Thank you for checking. Thoroughly instead of just taking an anonymous caller's word for it. Robert's mouth quirked slightly. Sarah, I've worked with you for 2 years. I know your character. But I also had to follow company policy. He closed the folder, but didn't put it away. That said, I do need to ask you directly. Was this call related to a personal conflict? Someone trying to damage your professional reputation for personal reasons? Sarah had prepared for this question, but actually answering it felt like stepping off a cliff. Yes, it was my brother. He wanted me to do something I wasn't comfortable with, and when I refused, he escalated. I see. Robert leaned back in his chair, studying her face. Sarah, I need you to understand something. While my investigation cleared you of any wrongdoing, the fact that this call was made creates a situation we need to address. The relief began to curdle into new anxiety. What kind of situation? The company has a policy about personal conflicts affecting the workplace. Even though you're not at fault, the fact that someone felt motivated to contact your employer suggests there might be ongoing issues that could create future problems. Sarah felt the trap closing around her again, different from Michael's manipulation, but equally effective. What does that mean for my job? Your job is secure. Your performance review is exemplary, and I've documented that thoroughly. But Robert hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with what he had to say next. I have to ask if you believe this person might contact the company again. If there's any chance this could escalate further. The question felt like standing at a crossroads, where every path led to consequences she couldn't control. If she said yes, she'd be admitting that her personal life posed a potential threat to her workplace. If she said no, she'd be lying. And, if Michael did escalate, she'd lose all credibility with Robert. I don't know, she said finally. I hope not. But I can't control his actions. I appreciate your honesty. Robert made a note in the file. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm documenting this conversation and my investigation results. If there are any future incidents, we'll have a clear record of the pattern and your cooperation in addressing it. And if there are future incidents? Robert's expression grew more serious. Then we'll have to consider whether this personal conflict poses a risk to company operations. I'm not saying that to threaten you, Sarah. I'm saying it so you understand the stakes. The meeting ended with Robert's assurance that her job performance remained exemplary and his confidence in her professionalism. But as Sarah walked back to her cubicle, she felt the weight of the file with her name on it, the permanent record of doubt that would follow her career. Jake was waiting by her desk, ostensibly organizing supply catalogs but clearly watching for her return. His expression shifted when he saw her face. How bad? I'm not fired. But there's a file now. A record of the incident that will follow. Me as long as I work here. Sarah sank into her chair, feeling exhausted despite the early hour. If Michael calls again, if he escalates this any further, I could lose my job. Bastard! Jake's voice was quiet, but vicious. He's found your pressure point, and he's going to keep pushing until you break. Maybe I should just give him the car. The words slipped out before Sarah could stop them, the exhaustion making her defenses crumble. Maybe it's not worth all this. Jake's response was immediate and sharp. Sarah, no, listen to me. If you give in now, you're teaching him that all he has to do is threaten your livelihood to get what he wants. What happens next time? What happens when he wants something else? There might not be a next time. There's always a next time, with people like Michael. They don't stop when they win. They just learn what works. Jake's voice carried the weight of personal experience. You give him the car now, and you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what threat he'll use. Next time he wants something from you. Sarah stared at her computer screen, the morning's emails blurring together. 3 days ago, her biggest worry had been a marketing presentation deadline. Now she was weighing the value of her self-respect against the security of her career, wondering if keeping her boundaries was worth the professional consequences. Jake, what if I can't fight this? What if he's just stronger than I am? He's not stronger. He's just more willing to hurt people. Jake's chair creaked as he leaned closer. Sarah, I've been documenting everything. Your work performance, your reliability, the timeline of when this started. If Robert's investigation didn't find anything, it's because there's nothing to find. You're not the problem here. Then why does it feel like I am? Because that's how manipulation works. It makes the victim feel responsible for the abuser's behavior. Jake's voice was gentle but firm. You didn't make Michael call your boss. You didn't create this situation. All you did was say no to something you weren't comfortable with. Sarah nodded, but the knot in her stomach remained. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she could hear Michael's voice from their childhood, the way he'd always been able to make her feel guilty for not going along with his plans. The golden child who'd learned early that the family would sacrifice Sarah's needs to maintain his happiness. The difference was, she wasn't a child anymore. And for the first time in her life, she had allies who understood what was really happening. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Coffee after work? We need to talk about next steps. Next steps. The phrase implied there was a plan, a strategy beyond just surviving Michael's attacks. Sarah looked at the message, then at Jake's concerned face, and felt something shift inside her chest. Maybe she didn't have to fight this battle alone. Sarah chose City Park for the meeting, specifically the bench near the duck pond where she and Michael had fed stale bread to mallards when they were children. The symbolism wasn't lost on her, returning to a place of shared innocence to confront the reality of who they'd become as adults. She arrived early, wanting the advantage of choosing her position, of being settled and prepared when Michael arrived. The manila folder in her lap contained everything Jake had helped her compile over the past 2 days. Printed emails with timestamps, a written record of every conversation since Michael's initial visit, and most damning of all, a copy of Ashley's text message confirming that Classic Cars of Colorado had never gone bankrupt. Sarah had spent Tuesday evening organizing the evidence like she was preparing for a trial, because in many ways, that's exactly what this was. Michael appeared at 2 p.m. sharp, walking across the park with the confident stride she remembered from their childhood, the gait of someone who'd never doubted his welcome anywhere he went. He wore his expensive suit like armor, his lawyer's uniform designed to remind everyone of his professional success and social standing. Sarah. He settled onto the bench beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something expensive that probably cost more than she spent on groceries in a month. I'm glad you wanted to talk. I was hoping we could resolve this situation before it gets any more out of hand. The phrasing was perfect, Michael, acknowledging conflict while positioning himself as the reasonable party trying to prevent further escalation. But Sarah had spent 3 years learning to read people through her job in marketing, and she could see the calculation behind his careful word choices. You mean before you destroy my career completely? Michael's expression shifted, the practiced charm flickering momentarily. That's a dramatic way to put it. I simply expressed legitimate concerns about... You lied. Sarah opened the folder, pulling out the printed timeline Jake had helped her create. You called my boss on Monday afternoon, approximately 18 hours after I refused to lend you my car. You told him I was unreliable and possibly stealing from the company. None of that was true. I told him I had concerns about your judgment, which I do. Your recent behavior suggests... My recent behavior suggests I've learned to say no to you. Sarah pulled out Ashley's text message, holding it where Michael could see the screen. Classic Cars of Colorado never went bankrupt. You canceled your reservation 3 weeks ago to try to book something more expensive. The mask slipped completely for a moment, and Sarah saw something ugly flicker across her brother's face. Not just anger, but genuine surprise that she'd done the research, that she'd gathered evidence instead of simply accepting his version of events. How did you... He caught himself, the lawyer's training kicking in. Ashley had no right to share private information about our wedding planning. Ashley shared the truth, something you seem to have trouble with. Sarah felt her voice growing stronger, steadier. You created this entire crisis, Michael. You manufactured a problem and then tried to make it my emergency to solve. Michael stood up, pacing to the edge of the pond as if the physical movement could help him regain control of the conversation. A family with small children was feeding ducks nearby, their laughter creating a surreal soundtrack to the confrontation. Fine. Maybe I handled the transportation situation poorly. Maybe I should have been more upfront about the details. He turned back to her, and for a moment, she saw something that might have been genuine remorse. But that doesn't change the fact that I need help, Sarah. This wedding is important to me, to Ashley, to our whole family. Important enough to destroy my job when I couldn't give you what you wanted? The question hung in the air between them. Sarah watched Michael's face cycle through expressions, calculation, frustration, and finally, something that looked almost like confusion. I didn't destroy your job. I made a phone call expressing concerns. If your work performance is solid, one phone call shouldn't threaten your position. The casual dismissal of what he'd done, the complete failure to understand the damage he'd caused, hit Sarah like a physical blow. Michael, there's now a file with my name on it questioning my integrity. A permanent record that will follow me for as long as I work there. My boss had to interview my colleagues about my character because of lies you told. If they were lies, they were lies and you know it. Sarah's voice was rising now, echoing across the pond. The family with children looked over, and she forced herself to lower her volume. You know exactly what you did, and why you did it. You wanted to punish me for saying no. Michael returned to the bench, but didn't sit down. Instead, he loomed over her, using his height to create a physical intimidation that had worked when they were children, but felt pathetic now. Sarah, I think you need to consider the bigger picture here. Family relationships are about give and take. Sometimes we make sacrifices for the people we love. I've been making sacrifices for this family my entire adult life. The words came out with more vehemence than she'd intended, years of suppressed resentment finally finding voice. I dropped out of college to help with Dad's medical bills while you finished law school. I worked 2 jobs and sent money home while you and Emma got your degrees. I've said yes to every family obligation, every request for help, every guilt trip about family loyalty, and we're grateful for that. No, you're not. Sarah stood up to meet his height, the folder clutched in her hands. You're not grateful, Michael. You're entitled. You expect my sacrifices because they've always been there, because I've never said no before. But gratitude would mean recognizing what those sacrifices cost me. Gratitude would mean not trying to destroy my career when I finally set a boundary. Michael's composure cracked further, revealing the entitled rage that Ashley had described. 1 car, Sarah. 1 day. After everything this family has done for you, you can't spare 1 car for 1 day? What has this family done for me? The question came out sharper than she'd intended, but she didn't take it back. I supported Dad's medical care. I sacrificed my education for the family's financial stability. I've been the reliable one, the dependable one, the one who always says, yes. What exactly has this family sacrificed for me? We're your family. We love you. That should be enough. Love doesn't call someone's boss with lies when they don't get what they want. Sarah opened the folder again, pulling out the printed record of his call to Robert Williams. Love doesn't try to destroy someone's livelihood over a car. Michael stared at the documentation, and for the first time in the conversation, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. I was angry. I felt like you were being unreasonable, and I may have overreacted. It was the closest thing to an admission she was likely to get from him, but it wasn't enough. Not after 3 days of professional anxiety, not after years of being the family's designated sacrifice. You overreacted. Sarah's voice was deadly calm. Michael, I want you to call my boss tomorrow morning. I want you to retract every lie you told him. I want you to admit that you made false accusations because I wouldn't lend you my car. I can't do that. Then I'm going to do something I should have done years ago. Sarah closed the folder, feeling a strange sense of finality. I'm going to tell everyone exactly who you are. Mom, Emma, Ashley's family, your law firm colleagues, everyone at the wedding, if there is a wedding. I'm going to tell them about the lies, the manipulation, the way you tried to destroy your sister's career because she wouldn't give you what you wanted. Michael's face went white. You wouldn't. Watch me. Sarah stood up, slinging her purse over her shoulder. You have until tomorrow morning to call Robert Williams and tell him the truth. If you don't, everyone is going to learn exactly what kind of man Ashley is about to marry. She walked away without looking back, hearing Michael call her name behind her but not turning around. The folder felt light in her hands now, no longer a burden of evidence, but a tool of liberation. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah Mitchell was done being the family's sacrifice. And if that meant watching Michael's perfect world crumble, so be it. Some bridges, she was learning, deserved to burn. Sarah's phone rang at 6:43 a.m. Saturday morning, jolting her from the first decent sleep she'd had in a week. Ashley's name appeared on the screen, and Sarah knew immediately that something had shifted in the delicate balance of power surrounding Michael's wedding. Sarah? Ashley's voice was strained but oddly calm, like someone who'd made a difficult decision and found peace in its finality. I did it. I called off the wedding. Sarah sat up in bed, fully awake now. When? About an hour ago. I couldn't sleep, so I went to the venue early to check on the flower arrangements. Michael was there too, screaming at the wedding coordinator because the centerpieces weren't exactly the shade of gold he'd envisioned. Ashley's laugh had a bitter edge. He made this poor woman cry, Sarah. She's been working since 5 a.m. to make everything perfect, and he reduced her to tears over the color of flowers. Ashley, that's when I knew I couldn't do it. I couldn't marry someone who treats people that way when he doesn't get exactly what he wants. I thought about what you said at the restaurant, about what our marriage would look like, what kind of father he'd be to our children. Ashley's voice strengthened. So, I told him I was calling off the wedding. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and dread. How did he react? Exactly how you'd expect. First he tried charm, then guilt, then threats. He said I was ruining his life, destroying his reputation, embarrassing both families. When that didn't work, he started blaming you. Me? He said you'd poison me against him, that you were jealous of his success and couldn't stand to see him happy. Classic Michael. Nothing is ever his fault. Ashley's tone turned dry. I told him that you didn't influence my decision. Watching him try to destroy your career influenced my decision. The morning sun was streaming through Sarah's bedroom window, and she could hear the city waking up around her. Somewhere across Denver, Michael was probably making frantic phone calls, trying to salvage his wedding day or at least control the narrative of its collapse. Where are you now? At my parents' hotel. They flew in from Oregon yesterday for the wedding. I had to wake them up at dawn to tell them their daughter was calling off her wedding 6 hours before the ceremony. Ashley's voice cracked slightly. My dad just hugged me and said he'd been worried about Michael's temper since the engagement party. Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming call, her mother's number. She let it go to voicemail. Sarah, I need you to know something. Michael didn't call your boss yesterday morning like you asked him to. He's not going to retract those lies or admit what he did. The confirmation of what Sarah had already suspected settled in her stomach like cold lead. Michael would never voluntarily admit his manipulation, because doing so would require acknowledging that his behavior was wrong, and Michael had built his entire identity around being the family member who was never wrong. I figured as much. There's something else. He's been calling everyone, your mom, Emma, some of your extended family. He's telling them that you and I conspired to ruin his wedding because we're jealous of his happiness. Sarah's second phone line lit up, Emma calling this time, then a text from a cousin she hadn't spoken to in months. The family mobilization was beginning. The careful network of relationships that Patricia Mitchell had spent decades nurturing suddenly activated around the crisis of Michael's canceled wedding. Ashley, are you okay? Do you need anything? I need to survive the next few hours without second-guessing myself. Ashley's voice was stronger now, more resolved. My parents are helping me call vendors, cancel services, return gifts. It's going to be expensive and complicated, but not nearly as expensive as a divorce would have been. After hanging up, Sarah sat in her bed listening to her phone buzz with incoming calls and messages. The family crisis she'd been dreading had arrived, but not in the way she'd expected. Instead of being forced to choose between her car and family peace, she was watching Michael's carefully constructed world collapse under the weight of his own behavior. Her voicemail box was filling up. First her mother, crying, Sarah, how could you do this to your brother? How could you turn Ashley against him right before the wedding? Then Michael himself, and his voice was nothing like the controlled lawyer who'd tried to manipulate her all week. This was pure rage, unfiltered, and ugly. I hope you're happy, Sarah. I hope destroying my wedding was worth proving whatever point you think you've made. You've embarrassed this entire family. Emma's message was different, calmer. Sarah, I'm getting calls from everyone. Michael's version is that you and Ashley conspired against him. Call me back so I can get the real story. By 10 a.m., Sarah was dressed and sitting in her kitchen with coffee, watching her phone light up with family drama. Part of her wanted to turn it off, to disappear for the day and let the Mitchell family civil war rage without her participation. But another part of her, the part that had spent 3 days gathering evidence and preparing for confrontation, knew that this was the moment everything would be decided. Her apartment buzzer rang. Sarah checked the building's video intercom and saw Patricia Mitchell standing at the entrance, her face streaked with tears and mascara. Sarah's mother had clearly driven straight from the canceled wedding venue to her daughter's apartment, and she looked like someone whose carefully ordered world had just exploded. Sarah buzzed her up, then opened her apartment door and waited. Patricia climbed the stairs slowly, looking older than her 63 years, carrying the weight of a family crisis she couldn't fix with maternal authority and homemade cookies. Sarah. Patricia's voice was hoarse from crying. We need to talk. Come in, Mom. Patricia entered the small apartment and immediately began pacing, her nervous energy filling the space. Michael's wedding is ruined. Ashley won't take his calls. The venue is chaos, the guests are confused, and everyone's asking what happened. What did you tell them? I don't know what to tell them. Patricia stopped pacing and looked directly at her youngest daughter. Michael says you turned Ashley against him. Ashley says Michael showed his true character. Emma says there's more to this story than anyone's admitting. I just want my family back together. Sarah poured her mother a cup of coffee, then sat across from her at the small kitchen table. Mom, what do you want to know? I want to know if my son is the man I raised him to be or if he's become someone I don't recognize. Patricia's voice was barely above a whisper. And I want to know if I failed both of my children by trying so hard to keep peace that I enabled something terrible. The question hung between them in the morning light, honest and painful, and long overdue. For the first time in Sarah's memory, her mother was asking for truth instead of demanding family loyalty. Sarah opened her laptop and pulled up the folder of evidence she'd compiled. Mom, I think it's time you learned exactly what Michael did when I told him no. Part 10. New Boundaries, New Beginnings. 3 months after what Patricia Mitchell had come to call the wedding that wasn't, Sarah drove her Mustang through the familiar curves of Highway 40 toward the Rocky Mountains. The autumn air was crisp enough to make her grateful for the convertible's heater, but she kept the top down anyway, needing the freedom of open sky above her head. The mountain road had become her sanctuary again, but everything else about her life had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The family dynamics that had defined her for 28 years had been forced into new configurations, relationships rebuilt or abandoned based on people's ability to accept uncomfortable truths. Her phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system, Emma's name appearing on the dashboard display. Sarah had grown accustomed to these weekly check-ins, a ritual that had developed as her sister navigated her own complicated relationship with their transformed family. How was therapy this week? Emma's voice carried the careful concern of someone still learning how to have honest conversations with family members. Good. Dr. Martinez thinks I'm making progress with setting boundaries without feeling guilty about it. Sarah shifted into a lower gear as the road began its serious climb into the foothills. She says it's normal for family scapegoats to struggle with self-advocacy even after they recognize the patterns. Family scapegoats. Emma repeated the phrase with something like wonder. I still can't believe it took us 30 years to put a name to what was happening. The therapy had been Jake's suggestion, made during one of their coffee shop conversations in the weeks following Michael's canceled wedding. You've spent your whole life being the family's emotional shock absorber, he'd said. Maybe it's time to learn how to be Sarah instead. Dr. Martinez had used different language: enablement, triangulation, parentification. But the underlying message was the same. Sarah had been cast in the role of family sacrifice before she was old enough to understand what that meant. And breaking free from that role required more than just saying no to a car loan. How's Mom doing? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer would be complicated. Better, I think. She's still seeing her own therapist, working through the guilt about enabling Michael's behavior for so long. She asked about you again yesterday. Patricia Mitchell's journey toward understanding had been the most painful to witness. The revelation of Michael's manipulation, documented in phone records, confirmed by Ashley's testimony, undeniable in its calculated cruelty, had shattered her worldview about her golden child. The mother who'd spent decades protecting Michael from consequences was finally confronting the monster that protection had created. What did you tell her? That you're doing well, that you're not ready for direct contact yet, but that you don't hate her. Emma's voice softened. Sarah. She knows she failed you. She knows that her fear of conflict enabled Michael to become someone who destroys people when he doesn't get his way. Sarah pulled into the familiar parking area overlooking Denver, the city sprawling below like a map of possibilities. The view had changed over the months. Not the physical landscape, but what it represented. Where she'd once seen an escape from family obligations, she now saw the place she'd chosen to build her life. I don't hate her, Sarah said, and meant it. But I can't go back to pretending that caring about family means accepting abuse. Mom's going to have to learn how to love me without expecting me to sacrifice myself to keep everyone else comfortable. The silence that followed was comfortable, the kind of quiet space that had developed between the sisters as they navigated their new relationship. Emma had returned to Denver twice since the canceled wedding, spending long weekends trying to understand the family dynamics she'd escaped by moving to Seattle. Any word from Michael? Sarah's jaw tightened involuntarily. Ashley forwarded me an email he sent last week, still blaming me for destroying his life, still insisting that he was just trying to help the family when he called my boss. Michael's inability to accept responsibility for his actions had been perhaps the most devastating revelation for their mother. Even when confronted with documented evidence of his lies, he'd continued to insist that his behavior was justified by Sarah's selfishness. The cognitive dissonance had been too much for Patricia to ignore, forcing her to choose between enabling her son's delusions and accepting the painful truth about who he'd become. What about his job? Last I heard, the law firm was reviewing his conduct. He's on administrative leave pending the ethics investigation. Apparently, calling someone's employer with false accusations is considered professional misconduct even when it's your sister. Sarah felt a grim satisfaction in the justice of it. Ashley's documentation of his pattern of manipulation didn't help his case. Ashley had become an unexpected constant in Sarah's life, their shared experience with Michael's toxicity forming the foundation of a genuine friendship. The teacher had shown remarkable strength in the aftermath of the canceled wedding, using her experience to help other women recognize manipulation in their own relationships. She started a support group, Sarah continued, for women who've been in emotionally abusive relationships. She says understanding what happened with Michael helped her recognize patterns from previous relationships too. That's incredible. Good for her. Sarah's phone chimed with a text message. Jake, asking if she wanted to meet for dinner after her drive. The friendship had deepened in the months since the family crisis, evolving into something that felt like chosen family in the truest sense. Emma, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think I was wrong to refuse him the car? Not the principle of it, but practically speaking. Would it have been easier for everyone if I just said yes? Emma's response was immediate and firm. Sarah, giving Michael that car wouldn't have ended anything. It would have taught him that threatening your livelihood was an effective way to get what he wanted. The next time he wanted something from you, the pressure would have been even worse. The conversation continued as Sarah began her drive back to Denver, the sisters discussing their mother's progress in therapy, Emma's complicated feelings about returning home for holidays, and the strange relief that came from finally understanding their family's dysfunction. As she entered the city limits, Sarah's phone rang again. Robert Williams's name appeared on the display, and she felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that workplace calls still triggered, even months after Michael's false accusations had been thoroughly debunked. Sarah, I hope I'm not interrupting your weekend. Not at all. What's up? I wanted to let you know that the regional director position in our Colorado Springs office just opened up. It's a significant promotion, more responsibility, better salary, leadership opportunities. I'd like to recommend you for the position. Sarah pulled into a parking lot, needing to focus on the conversation. The promotion represented everything. She'd been working toward professionally, validation that her career was back on track despite Michael's attempts to derail it. I'm interested. What would the timeline look like? Interviews start next month. The position would begin in January. Robert paused. Sarah, I want you to know that your handling of the situation with the false accusations impressed a lot of people here. Your professionalism under pressure, your documentation and preparation, those are leadership qualities we value. After ending the call, Sarah sat in her car processing the offer. Colorado Springs would mean leaving Denver, starting fresh in a city where nobody knew about family drama or canceled weddings. It would mean a new beginning built entirely on her own terms. But it would also mean leaving behind the support system she'd built, Jake's friendship, Ashley's understanding, even the complicated reconciliation process with her mother and Emma. It would mean trading the familiar mountains where she'd learned to find peace for the unknown terrain of a new life. Her phone chimed with a text from Ashley. Coffee tomorrow? I want to hear about your mountain drive, and I have news about the support group. Then Jake. Dinner at that new place on Larimer. I promise not to psychoanalyze your family dynamics, unless you bring them up first. Finally, Emma. Thank you for taking my call. I know these conversations aren't always easy, but they mean everything to me. Love you, little sister. Sarah started the Mustang's engine, the familiar rumble settling something deep in her chest. The car that had started this entire conflict remained what it had always been, proof that she could build something beautiful through her own efforts, evidence that her needs and wants mattered. But now it represented something more. The moment she'd learned to say no and mean it. The catalyst for a transformation that had freed not just herself, but everyone in her family who was willing to embrace uncomfortable truths. The Colorado promotion waited, full of possibility and new challenges. The family relationships continued their slow, painful healing process. The support system she'd built would endure whatever changes came next. As Sarah drove through Denver's evening traffic toward dinner with Jake, she realized that keeping her car had never really been about the car at all. It had been about keeping herself, her independence, her self-respect, her right to exist, as something more than the family's designated sacrifice. The Mustang purred through the city streets, carrying her toward a future she was finally free to choose. Behind her, the mountain stood sentinel over the life she'd rebuilt from the ashes of toxic family loyalty. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah Mitchell was driving towards something instead of away from it. And that, she thought, made all the battles worthwhile. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.